Hi everyone, and welcome to TLC. Thank you for joining me. This is an audiobook series, meaning we will be presenting two factual evidences of His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie. The first as Elijah, whom the Bible prophesied about. Bible verse Malachi 4 verse 5 reads, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes." The second is the name given to him at birth, Rastafari, leading to his coronation crowning as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords in 1930, the 2nd of November. Bible verse Revelations 19 verse 16 reads, "And he has a name written on his robe and on his thigh, King of Kings and Lord of Lords."
My Life and Ethiopia's Progress by Emperor Haile Selassie. The autobiography of Emperor Haile Selassie I, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. For all who are able to purchase the autobiographies and support the people who are publishing the words of Haile Selassie I, so that they can in tune to publish Jah words for our future generations. Arc 1. The Preface. A house built on granite and strong foundations, not even the onslaught of pouring rain, gushing torrents, and strong winds will be able to pull down. Some people have written the story of my life, representing as truth what is in fact derives from ignorance, error, or envy. But they cannot shake the truth from its place, even if they attempt to make others believe it. At this hour, when I have found occasion and time to write the story of my life, I preface my writing by presenting the following prayer to my Creator, and then continue this work. O Lord, Almighty, in whom there is no weakness, eternal, in whom there is no transience, in admiring your work as well as your judgments, a created being, even after much searching, cannot fathom them, except to a limited extent. It is a subtle secret, which a creature, even much exploring, cannot know, but which you alone do know. Why in the immediate past, as well as now, you have made the Ethiopian people, from the ordinary man to the emperor, sink in a sea of distress for a time, and why you have made the Italian people, up to his king, swim in a sea of joy for a time. Since no creature created in your image and in your pattern gives up hope that everything he begs of you will be done for him until the day you serve his soul from his body, we beseech you that Ethiopia should not remain with a freedom extinct and prostrate under an alien ruler, so that the mouth of her people be silenced for fear of a foreign governor, but rather that you will save them by your deeds of kindness, lest they remain with their hearts oppressed through being deprived of their own Ethiopian ruler, who was leading them towards civilization under light yoke and with gladness. O Lord, abode of exiles, light of the blind, truth and justice are your thrones. Receive us, who have been exiled for our freedom's sake, who have had to leave our country on account of violent assault. In praying to you, thus, it is not for our righteousness, but for your great mercies. And now, I am setting out, contemplating to write the story of my life, and from my 13th year unto this time, on the basis of what you have, making me your instrument. I pray to you that it may be your will to let it reach completion. It is right for me to reveal in this preface that the reason why I have thought to write this, although from you nothing is hidden. First, that your name may be praised for all the deeds you do, acting according to your wishes. Second, when you make a man rich in the honors of this world and appoint him above other creatures, that is known that it is not for his merit, but only through your benevolence and generosity. Third, in every line in this history where the name of another person is mentioned, it is not through partiality or enmity, save in error, but you know that we are making our hearts the judge to write only the truth. Fourth, although there is nothing that is not written in the Holy Scriptures, if you will enable me to write as I have planned, may our King and our brothers who will rise up in the future take note of the word you have spoken, for without me you cannot do nothing. And may the hearts be convinced that with your help alone will they be able to do anything. Fifth, unless a man discharges his task by his own resolve and perseverance, conscious of being your tool, whether in times of joy or tribulation, he should realize that it ought to work by his innate ability or by such education as he may have acquired. For his responsibility will not cease even if it acts solely under another man's will. 6. Whether the task may be, let everyone realize and be convinced that it will be accomplished at the proper time and age. That it is impossible to have it fulfilled either by just desiring it or by hurrying it unduly. I pray to you that all this may be in full account with your will. Introduction. Whatever the task may be, man may begin it, but he cannot complete it unless God sustains and supports him. If he fails to accomplish the task on which he has set out, having worked to the best of his ability, he is not to be mangled by being called lazy. Thus, we ourselves, by the virtue of our descent from the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon, ever since we accepted in the trust in 1909 equals to 1916, first to regency of the Ethiopian realm and later the imperial dignity, right up to the present, we have set out to the best of our ability to improve gradually internal administration by introducing into the country Western modes of civilization, through which our people may attain a higher level. Hence, our co-science does not rebuke us. In explanation of the notion gradually, unless it is through coasting a child and getting it accustomed, it will not be pleased if one takes from it what it has seized with its hand. When one gives such a baby any sort of food, it will not wish to eat it, unless one shows it to the child and lets it taste it. Unless they give it milk or other soft food until it grows teeth, it will not be able to eat when they place bread or meat before it. And similarly, with people who have lived by custom only, without learning at school, without observing knowledge by the ear or observing and searching with the eye, it is necessary to accustom them through education to abandon habits by which they have for long living, to make them accept new ways, yet not by harshly or cruel methods, but by patience and study, gradually and over a prolonged period. In 1901, which equals to 1908 to 9, Emperor Melik fell ill and had to spend his time at home. Soon after this, Ras Badiwada Tazama, Ledj Iyasu Regent, suddenly died. As a consequence, Ledj Iyasu, who had accepted the authority to guide the government, was for about 6 years quite incapable of shouldering irresponsibilities. When I myself took over this responsibility in 1909, which equals to 1916, it was necessary to correct the chaotic neglect of fully 6 years and to make a beginning with the work not yet started. For example, of introducing the new civilization, I spent my time working to the best of my ability, while my own ideas and people fond of old customs, particularly as a letter had many supporters, squeezed me like wood between two pieces of iron. There was very little time that I could spend in idle conversations and doing the things that gives one pleasure. When I set right in terms of internal administration, initiated already at the early stage, the innovations are brought about and such aspects of foreign-inspired civilization as I introduce into the country will be found in the following, each at its proper place. In addition to this, from time to time we encountered some difficulties, internal as well as external. In addition to this, from time to time, we encountered some difficulties, internal as well as external, which were spread about by natives or by foreigners and which constituted obstacles to our work of innovation. It was thus essential to carry out everything patiently in order to prevent upheavals, bloodshed, and tribal divisions. I was aware, even before I took over the affairs of government, that internal upheaval constituted a useful contribution to the designs of our enemies. We were particularly convinced by the policies directed against us that the enemy's heart was stricken with envy at our setting up a constitution to strengthen and to consolidate Ethiopia's unity at our opening schools for boys and girls, at our building hospitals in which our people's health was to be safeguarded, as well as at the sorts of other initiatives of our by which Ethiopians' independence would be affirmed. Not only in terms of history, but in actual fact. For this reason, while we took great care to prevent any divisions amongst our people, we did not wish to take any coercive measures that might appear oppressive to our people. While we were engaged upon all this careful work and were being to be led our people on the road to civilization, our enemy rose up with violence, sending to our country many troops with modern equipment as well as numerous warplanes and tanks. We addressed an appeal to the League of Nations, and with our hearts free of panic, we encouraged our armies. While we resisted firmly and defended ourselves, they poured all sorts of poison and smoke gases upon us, which were capable of causing serious damage and which were prohibited by international law. They dropped many bombs on us and even bombarded international Red Cross doctors, together with the medical equipment, thus preventing those injured by the bombs and machine guns or suffocating with poison gas from receiving medical attention or cure. We ourselves fought for our liberty in battles like any ordinary soldier and mustered up the troops like any other officer. On account of our inability to obtain even a loan for the purchase of arms, we did not have any adequate equipment for defense, except for a few modern weapons. After we had resisted to the best of our ability with weapons 40 years old, we were defeated for the time being in no shameful manner. The reason why we returned to Addis Ababa and why we departed from Addis Ababa to go abroad and all other such matters are to be found in the following at the appropriate places. We would therefore remind confidently and earnestly all those who are Ethiopian subjects to persist unceasingly by striving to the best of their ability in the study of Ethiopia's past, from the earliest phases of history, lest her freedom be extinguished altogether in the future. Particularly as our country of Ethiopia has now been overwhelmed by perils which have raised to the anxiety for independence, and we would equally urge all those who are not Ethiopians but who hate aggression and love truth and justice not to withhold their support for the cause of Ethiopia's liberty. The people at large by their councils and the priests by their prayer. Haile Selassie I, Emperor of Ethiopia, Bath, England. Written Yakatit 1929, which is your February 1937. Chapter 1. The story of my childhood up to my appointment as Dejazmatch, 1892 to 1906. My father, His Highness Ras Makonnen, was the son of the Princess Tanaga Wag, the daughter of the great king Haile Selassie of Shoha. His father was Dejazmatch Walda Makel, Walda Malakalot of Doba and Mans nobility. He was born on the 1st of Jembot 1844, which equals to the 8th of May 1852, at a palace called Darafol Meriam in the district of Gola. Ras Makonnen remained with his father for about 14 years. This was of course at a time when Menelik II, the son of Makonnen's uncle, King Haile Malakot, was still only king of Shoha. His father, Dejazmatch Walden Makel, then took him to Menelik and said, "Let this my son, your aunt's offspring, grow up with you in your palace." And Menelik made Makonnen his special companion, quite apart from the chance fact of their family ties. Subsequently, since King Menelik had become convinced of Makonnen's loyalty and skill in the service of government, having tested him many times in various tasks to which he had appointed him, he raised him to the rank of Balamaras when he was aged 24 in the year 1868, which equals 1876. At this time, Makonnen married Wazaru Yasima Bet, my mother, as his lawful wife. While Menelik II was still only king in 1879, which equals to 1886 to 87, he conducted a military expedition into Harar region and restored this ancient province in Ethiopia. Since he had become known to him that my father was various in battle and a friend and leader of soldier, he appointed him at the time of Harar's occupation governor of the town and his province, as well as commander-in-chief with the rank of Dejazmatch. And similarly, after Menelik II had been appointed King of Kings of Ethiopia, he appointed my father to the dignity of Ras in Mayaza 1882, which equals to April 1890. When my father conducted military expedition in Harar region, it did so leaving behind in Shoha my mother, Wazaru Yazimabet, his lawful wedded wife, whom he had married according to Christian customs. When the war was over and the country began to be pacified, he let her come to Harar. He then secured the Ogaden region, which had not been incorporated with Harar province. While temporarily he still had to lay plans of war, he yet continued easing the tax burdens, which weighed heavily upon the population. I was born on the 16th of Emil 1884, which equals to your 23rd of July 1892. In the year of John at Ejasa Jaro, not far from Harar, Wezaro Mazalagiya, the daughter of my father's sister, Wazaro Eta Mariam, had married Dejazmatch Haile Selassie Abayana. When I was 4 months old, she gave birth to Emiru, now Ras Emiru. And the two of us grew up together as if we were twins. When we were age 7, my father arranged for a special teacher for us, and we began receiving instructions at home. In our 10th year, 3 years after beginning our education, we were able to read and write Amharic and Jesus. Our upbringing was like that of sons of ordinary people, and there was no undue softness about it, as was the case with princes of that period. My mother, Wazaro Yazimabet, being barely 30 years old, died on the 6th of Megabite, 1886, which is your 14th of March, 1894, and was buried within the precinct of St. Michael's Church, 21 at Harar by the Influenza water. All this I heard, of course, much later from those in charge of my upbringing. Many were the months which my father, H.H. Ras Makonnen, had to spend traveling to Addis Ababa and on military expeditions to other provinces of Ethiopia and more. In fact, then he was able to remain in his own governorate of Harar. He also went to foreign countries as envoy of the government. Here are some of the journeys undertaken by my father in 1881, equals 1880 to 89. He was sent to Italy in 1818, which equals 1895 to 96. During the Ledj campaign, he conducted the military expedition as commander-in-chief and was accompanied by Ras Wallo, Ras Makel, Ras Magadasha Atikam, Ras Alula, Dejazmatch Waldin, Fituwari Gabayahu, Fituwari Takal, Liga Makawas Adamwa, and Quajamach Tasafa. In 1890, which equals 1897 to 98. He undertook a campaign in western Ethiopia, at the southern border, into what is called the Arab country. This is the region nowadays referred to as Benin Shagar. in 1891, which equals to 1898 to 89. Since he had been reported that Ras Magasha, the governor of Tigre province, had rebelled against Emperor Malek. Ras Makonnen was dispatched into Tigre and brought about a reconciliation between Magasha and Emperor. Subsequently, in order to safeguard the security of the province, just as he had done when he occupied Harar, he remained in charge of Tigre for about 2 years, and then he returned. In 1894, which equals to 1902, he was sent to England for the coronation of King Edward VIII. In addition to all this, it was he who had carried out and concluded the whole business of relation with foreign countries, which is nowadays undertaken by ministries of foreign affairs. And consequently, he had to go to, for, and Addis Ababa each year, been summoned to consult with Emperor Menelik about every important matter as yet decided, after correspondence by post and conversations by telephone. As the railway did not yet exist as it does today, the journey by slow march from Harar to Addis Ababa took a month. Since my father had seen European civilization, having been to Europe twice, since he was convinced of the value of education through conversing with some of the foreigners who had come to Ethiopia, he strongly desired that I should learn from them a foreign language. My father had established a hospital in this city of Harar and had brought into his employment a gentleman from the French colony of Guadeloupe, a physician by the name of Dr. Vitalian. With this subject in mind, my father arranged that the doctor should teach us French, an hour or so a day when he could be spared from curing the sick. And so we began our lessons. My father had a strong desire to see the people get accustomed to the work of civilization, which he had observed in Europe, and to make a start in his government. It was for this reason that he had established the first hospital in the city of Harar. A year after my father's death, the French government purchased this hospital by the following accord from Menelik II for 50 francs. The Lion of the tribe of Judah has prevailed. Menelik II, elect of God, King of Kings of Ethiopia. May it reach Dejazmatch Yama. How are you? Thanks be to God, I am well. M. Kolaboski, the special envoy and minister plenipotentiary in Ethiopia, has acquired on behalf of the government of the French Republic the hospital which Ras Makonnen had established at Harar, and to which the French government had brought a doctor to care for the sick of our country, and therefore had the ground design and dimensions of this hospital measured, and have the title deeds written out and consigned them to M. Nagara, the French consul at Harar. Given on the 29th of Emil 1899, 5th of August 1907, at the city of Addis Ababa. My father was anxious that I should learn French as quickly as possible, but because he had become convinced that Dr. Vitalian's lesson of only an hour or so a day would not bring us closer to his target, he had a word with Abba Andres, who was a resident in the city of Harar. He sent us an Ethiopian called Abba Samuel, who had grown up as a pupil in his mission's establishment. He sent out to teach us with care and attention. Even so, we did not give up our daily lessons with Vitalin. Abba Samuel, our teacher, was the son of Aga Wadin Kanan. He is the Weldon Canon who was converted to Catholicism at the time when Abba Macias of Italian mission arrived in Shoha. It is for this reason that his son Abba Samuel had entered the Catholic mission, compound and studied there. Abba Samuel was a good man who possessed great knowledge, who applied himself to learning and teaching, who is goodness and humility gathered knowledge like a bee from anyone, who was devoted to the love of God and of his neighbor, and who did not strive to find enjoyment of the flesh, but of the soul. I am saying this because I had known him extremely well while we were together some 10 years ago. As he has been observed in the preface of this book, I decided to write a record of my work, beginning at the age of 13. Everything I had done prior to that was under the direction and guidance of my tutor. From the age of 13 onwards, although my physical strength may have not been great, my spiritual and intellectual powers began to increase gradually, and thus had the entrance gate of this world opened. And this was the time at which I started to act on my own will, without being ordered by my tutor, distinguishing good and evil, and conscious that this action will offend others, that action will give pleasure, this being damaging, that on the other hand useful. Thus I began to climb the ladder of introduction to this world. As the love that existed between H.H, my father, and myself was altogether special, I can feel it up to this present. He always used to praise me for the work which I was doing, for my being obedient. His officers and his men used to love me respectfully, because they observed with admiration the affection which my father had for me. I observed H.H, my father, striving to fulfill to the best of his ability the Christian ordinances, enjoined by giving his money to the poor in trouble and to the church, and by praying at every convenient hour. As I grew up, the spiritual desires was guiding me to emulate him, and so to conduct myself that his example should dwell within me. There was no one who did not know that my father's way of life was as described here above. As I grew up, the spiritual desire was guiding me to emulate him, and so to conduct myself that his example should dwell within me. There was no one who did not know that my father's way of life was as described here above, either in the palace or among the clergy. Of the great of that period, there's still several alive of the time this book is being written, and everyone knows that it is not extravagant. As my father noticed that all my inclination was directed towards education, his joy was constantly increasing in the measures of his affection. Chapter 2. From my appointment as Dejazmatch to my father's death, 1906. Because of the strength of his love, my father was anxiously waiting for the time at which I, being sufficiently grown up, would attain to rank, and when I was 13 years old, 3 months, on the 21st of Taquemt, 1898, which equals the 1st of November 1905. He appointed me as Dejazmatch in the large region called Garamutala. But according to our country's customs, this dignity of Dejazmatch was for the sake of rank only. My age did not yet permit me to sit in a judgment in court, or to administer to the governorate, or to muster the army in battle order. And therefore, my father gave me a chief administrator for all the work, to act as tutor, deputy, namely his principal trust servant, Fatuwari Kwalach. On the day on which I was appointed to the rank of Dejazmatch, my father's officers and his troops assembled, and he introduced me to them in the great reception hall. After this, I was entered into the inner chamber where my father was, and because he had awarded me the dignity of Dejazmatch, I kissed his shoe. I sat down by his side. Thereupon, the officers and all the chiefs of the army, having been summoned once again, came in. And when they were standing in front of H.I.M, my father, he delivered the following speech. All of you are my servants, whom I have raised up and whom I love. Therefore, I entrust to you with God, my son Pt.3. His faith is in the hands of the Creator, but I command him to you, lest you should bear him ill will. When the officers and troops heard this speech, they began to shed tears, saying, the fact that our master is making a speech like this about the trust seems like a farewell occasion, as if it were at the time had come to us to be separated by death. While I was pleased that my father had bestowed on me this rank of Dejazmatch, yet my joy was mixed with sadness at his delivering to his officers a heartbreaking speech like this. But each thought which my father had with regard to me when he gave me this high rank derived from long rather than short deliberations. He had made prior arrangements with a view to my having a separate house for myself alone to live in. He had given instructions on the morrow of my appointment to the effect that they should consign the house to me, together with the officers required for each aspect of the work. While all my father's officers used to like me respectfully, also previously, yet afterwards they manifested to me their exquisitely respectfully affection. Now that I had been appointed Dejazmatch and had a separate household set up for me, although my age did not yet permit it, I was yet allowed, since my appointment to rank of Dejazmatch, to be present and to sit down when the great officers came to my father's official for business. To be present and to sit down when the great officers came to my father officially for business affairs or for a banquet. I could clearly feel the pressure of H.I.M, my father, and of the officers when I completed any sort of work which my tender age allowed me to pursue. When I listened attentively to their speech and counsel, and when I spoke or gave answers to questions I was asked, I thank my Creator as clearly recall how those of my father's officers who had survived until now sometimes tell me, reviving past tales, when at the time you were appointed as Dejazmatch, you used to tell such and such. Being asked something like this, you used to answer something like that. Because my father was on his own after his wife, my mother, Wazaru Yashima Bet, had died, he used to neglect his meals times and let them pass. But as there was nobody to direct him to say mealtime has arrived, I would beg him in fear, entering his chamber and saying, mealtime has come, so please let it be your wish for dinner to be brought in. And consequently, he would order the meal to be brought in at once with a view to please me. When I saw him and the officers ate, I felt a sense of joyful pride in my joyful spirit, and my father used to commend me for doing this. H.I.M, my father, had the good fortune to be loved and to be feared. If a man, however great in his position might be, was found to be in the wrong, my father would determine the punishment accordingly to the measure of his offense. But because he would not keep silent, they came to fear him. But a few days later, he would cause pleasure by sending to home a gelded ox, honey, and butter. If the convicted person was a great man of position, or castrated goat, and money to buy honey and butter, if he was an ordinary person, indeed, the people would love for this because there was nothing of actual cruelty in him towards the man against whom he had meted at punishment. Besides, even though no man is perfect and pure before God, since my father's main thought was to please God in every possible manner, he was determined to help with money those in difficulty, to reconcile those who had fallen foul of the Emperor Melech, to offer prayers at any hour that remained from the work of the government in which he was engaged, to assist in the troubles the monks in which of the ministries and the priests in each of the churches. That he was doing all this was part of his resolve to please God without being vainglorious. He was a fine example of good deeds. Chapter 3. From the death of H.I.M my father till my appointment to the governorship of Harar, 1906 to 1910. Whatever may befall a man in this world, there is no one who concludes his days entirely in joy or in grief, but pleasure and sadness occur alternately in their turn. Hence, all my thoughts were floating in a sea of distress as my father, who loved me dearly and was so fond of me, fell gravely ill. H.I.M my father departed from this city of Harar to go up to Addis Ababa on the 4th of Tigre, 1898, which equals to your 12th of January 1906. At that time, it felt a little unwell. On the 9th of Tigre, which equals to January the 17th, he camped at the Bakar River. After having spent the day celebrating at the Temquet festival there, he went back because the illness took a stronger grip on him and entered this city called Quebec, where he began to be treated by a doctor. At this time, as my father summoned me in his desire to see me, I went up to Quebec. When I entered his bedroom to see his condition, and he saw me standing by his side, he motioned me with his eyes to sit down. Since it was difficult for him to speak with his tongue on account of the severity of his illness, as I was convinced that it was his wish that would not part from me, I spent the whole day sitting by his side. But the hour of judgment of death decided upon by the power of God cannot be postponed, even by the love of many, let alone by the love of one father and his son. Thus, he died at Quebec on the 13th of Megabite, 1898, which equals to your 21st of March, 1906. And he was buried in a church at St. Michael, which he himself had founded at Harar. After this, my father's officers and troops assembled in full. As one hand, my father had said to them during his lifetime, I command to you my son Tafari. And since in the second place they were aware of my father's loyalty to the Emperor Melech and his dignity services to his government, they expressed the hope that he, the emperor, would not fail to give him Tafari, his father's governorate of Harar, after they concluded their consultations, saying, we shall go up to Addis Ababa, following the memorial service of Taska. Customary, after 40 days, a letter reached the office from Emperor Melech stating, come at once with Tafari, his son, for it is before me at Addis Ababa that the limitations for Ras Makonan's 40th day mourning are to be held. While my father was still alive, he had prepared a present intended to be sent to the Emperor Menek, and since it was an object he had put aside, we took it with us when we departed from Harar on the 3rd of Miyazaya, 10th of April, and set out on our journey to Addis Ababa. As many people died on us during the trip, grief was heaped upon grief. The reason was that the small rainy season was active, and that because of the multitude of the army, malaria spread in our camp on the 19th of Miyazaya, which is the 26th of April. We reached Addis Ababa. Emperor Menek had given orders that tents be pitched, swung together like hangers on the vast field, as which he gave a memorial banquet for my father, and there he caused the officers and troops to assemble. While the limitations proceeded, with the arrivals stationed at one side and the host mustered on the other, we were gathered with Emperor Menek in great mourning. On the 40th day, which is Monday the 22nd of Miyazaya, the 30th of April 1906 to you, the priests of the monasteries and the churches in Addis Ababa and surroundings, after completing the prayer of absolution proper for Christians, all proceeded to the tent that had been prepared and spent the day at the great banquet arranged for them. The Rasses and Dejazmatches, because some of them were his blood relations and others had grown up with him, entered the appropriate part of the tent, stood there, observed lest items of food should be missing. To the poor were given, apart from food, a lot of hams of cash. On the morrow, according to the custom of our country, on the 40th day after a person's death, limitations have been held as on the day of the death itself. On the vast field, there were big tents that pitched, and the officers and troops assembled. Emperor Menek himself was seated in the center, and in the most amazing display of mourning was performed for my father, when his ceremonial robes, his Rasses crown, his medals, and his battle arms were carried, and his horse and mules, saddled in golden harnesses, were paraded in the midst of the army. One of the mourners composed in his honor the following dirge, which he recited. The telephonist, when he announced his death, was wrong. It is not Makonnen but the poor who died. In the Addis Ababa palace, it was being said that no one knew an occasion when similar limitation and mourning had occurred for anyone. After the demonstration of this limitation had ceased, the ushers informed the assembled army that they should go home. They then departed and went on their way. But my father's troops, who had come with me from Harar, had remained there quietly. And when they were asked, "Why do you remain when the entire army has left?" they replied, "It is to escort to his camp our master's son, Dejazmatch Tafari." When the emperor heard this, he permitted me to go to the camp with my father's troops. When we left, my father's Addis Ababa's friends came to join us and to accompany me to the camp. All passers-by on the way stopped and expressed astonishment on account of the extraordinary size of the escort. Owing to this event, other friends of my father's who were living at Addis Ababa, let alone my father's troops, told me they had heard people say among themselves, "The fact that Emperor is permitting Dejazmatch Tafari to go back with his father's army may be because Menelik is thinking of giving him governorship of Harar." But my elder brother, Dejazmatch Yelma, who had been born to my father before he married my mother, Wezaro Yeshimabet, had married Wezararo Asalafetch, the daughter of Empress Tatu sisters. For this reason, Empress Pt.3, used to supporting all her relatives, was said to be exerting herself with a view to Dejazmatch getting the governorship of Harar. She was arguing that while there is an elder son, the younger son should not be appointed to the father's governorship. And because there had been delay in the announcement, very many people rose up in deciding that the governorship of Harar should actually be mine. But since on one hand, Empress Pt.3 had pestered Emperor Melik by saying, "Give it to Dejazmatch for my sake," and because on the other hand, the time had not yet arrived for which God had determined that I should become governor of Harar, the matter was decided by saying, "Let it go to Dejazmatch. The reason why my father's troops and his friends thought that the governorship should be mine was because they were used to me being constantly in my company, and because my father was still alive, had said to them, "I command you to my son Tafari." After the decision to give the governorship of Harar to my brother Dejazmatch had been taken, it appeared to be thought that it would upset me and the army if the proclamation were issued while I dealt in the midst of my father's troops. I was therefore summoned from the camp some 8 days before the date of the proclamation, that it was arranged that I should stay in a tent prepared for me in the palace of the precinct. Then they ordered some of my father's most loyal officers who had shown particular favor and affection to me, Dejazmatch Abba Tabor Fatiwari, now Dejazmatch, Haile Selassie Abanya, to stay here at Addis Ababa as the supplements threatening them for a time with royal displeasure and detention. The reason was that Dejazmatch Abba Tabor and Fatiwari Haile Selassie had firmly assumed that the governorship of Harar would be mine. And it was rumored that the advice had been given on the part of Empress Pt.3 that if they were now to go back to Harar, they might at every opportunity make things difficult for Dejazmatch. 8 days later, on the 2nd of Genbot, which is equals to 9th of May 1906, the Emperor's proclamation was issued to the effect that he gave Harar the governorate of Ras Makonnen to Dejazmatch and Saleh the governorate of Ras Daji to Dejazmatch Tafari. As a consequence, my father's army as a whole was distressed. Among them were many who came to stay with me and live in their homes, saying, "We shall not go to Dejazmatch and abandon Dejazmatch Tafari, our master's Ras Makonnen's son, whom he had entrusted to us." Among those who remembered me were Fatiwari, Kwalach, Ledj, later Dejazmatch, Wallo Selassie, Ato Danik, Gobaz, Ledj Alamaku Joshu, later Tafawari, Dejazmatch Wallo Mariam, Abayana, Ato Selabes, later Bajaron, Ato Ayala Wada Raphael, later Tashafa Therese, Dejazmatch Defat Chow, Ato Tafari Balawa, Dejazmatch Gabriel Wald, Ato Waki, later Dejazmatch. During the time when I served as governor of Salale, orders were given to reconstruct the church of the monastery of Dabra, Libanos, which had fallen into ruin. Hence, when the foundation was excavated, there were found a ring and a piece of gold, which was very fine and which bore an inscription, my deputy, who was carrying out the work there, sent it to me, and it reached the emperor through me. It was thus reckoned to be a great good fortune for me, having gone, according to the custom of the country, to the governorship of Saleh. The emperor yet permitted me to stay with my retainers. Since I did not wish to be separated from the emperor, it was arranged that my deputy should reside in the governorate of Saleh, while I spent the whole day at Addis Ababa Palace, from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., 8 whole months of attendance at court. At that time, Emperor Menelik had opened a school for young Ethiopians to study foreign languages and had brought teachers from Egypt, while selecting Ledj Iyasu, Ledj Baru, Ledj Gatawachu, and other sons of great nobles, placing them at the school. He left me out. At this was a matter of great sadness to me. But when I spoke to him a few days later, revealing my desire to study, he gave me permission and said, "It was because you were her governor that I thought you should choose to live like the nobles. But if you wish to study, then go and learn." Thus, I began my studies. But while at Harar, I had learnt French. Now, at Addis Ababa, since it was not appropriate to take lessons together with the beginners, they began to teach us separately, fixing some hours for us alone. Those of us studying together were Ledj Iyasu, Emru, Ato Asafar Baneti, and Ledj Zadwa Gabana, later Fatiwari. After I had remained for about a year in appointment over Sahale, I was appointed to the governorship of Basso. My brother, Dejazmatch, after having governed for about 17 months following his appointment over Harar, died at Harar on the 29th of Maskaram, 1900, which equals to your 10th of October 1907. And when the sad announcement was transmitted by telephone to Addis Ababa, and we had grasped it, there was great mourning. Afterwards, it again began to be said by mouth of every man that the governorship of Harar was to be given to Dejazmatch Tafari. But, as I have said before, since the time had not arrived which God had determined for me to become governor of Harar, on the 27th of Megabyte 1900, which equals to your 4th of April 1908, the governorship of Harar was given to Dejazmatch Baucha, while the emperor gave me part of the governorship of Sidamon. Therefore, I had to abandon my studies and was ordered to proceed together with the army to my governorate of Sidamon and to take care of business of government. It was arranged that some 3,000 men of my father's army at Harar should come to me. When my departure for Sidamon was decided, it was considered to me that Dejazmatch Abba Tabo and Fatiwari Haile Selassie, who had remained in a nominal detention, should go with me. Since Dejazmatch Abba Tabo was alert in everything, he did well, as firm in his word of truthful without any falsehood whatsoever. This was to me a matter of great good fortune. During the period I served in my governorate of Sidamon, I had a time of perfect joy, as I encountered no trouble whatsoever, because they worked for me, Dejazmatch Abba Tabo, being responsible for outside work, and my grandmother, my mother's mother, Wazaro Walata Jirojis, being responsible for the inside work, while I knew that it was proper to exercise judicial functions. A provincial governor, according to local customs, would sit in court. Up to now, I had not dared exercising those functions of sitting in judicial assembly, seeing the tenderness of my age. But now, since my appointment to governorship of Sidamore, I began to pronounce judgment while sitting in court on Wednesdays and Fridays. While I divided my own previous servants, those who had come to me from my father's army and the newcomers who had entered my service after I had gone to Addis Ababa, into 3 parts, making proper adjustments for each according to their ranks and assigning their duties. I remained there very happy for about a year. Then when I heard in 1909, which equals to 1908 to 9, that the emperor was gravely ill, I asked for the permission to come to Addis Ababa. As the emperor's missive reached me, allowing me to come, I went to Addis Ababa in the month of Miyaza, April 1909, after giving orders to my chiefs in each district that they should carry out their work diligently and that they should guard the country meticulously. Since the Emperor Melik was gravely ill, he no longer had the strength to undertake any major work, except to appear before the army by coming out into the palace square. Consequently, all the people, great and small alike, felt gravely grieved. As to all the work of the government, it was Empress Tatu who took on as plenipotentiary. For this reason, as peace became disturbed, many people appeared in the palace precinct, endeavoring to stir up agitation. As all this was going on, and while Empress Tatu, acting as plenipotentiary, was carrying out all the work of government, envious men began a conspiracy against her to deprive her of her powers and to evict her from the palace. When they asked me to join them in the conspiracy, I told them I did not wish to enter into their plot, and consequently all the conspirators began to look upon me with enmity. When Empress Tatu heard about my refusal to enter into the conspiracy, she told the emperor, and both were very pleased. Although the emperor was gravely ill, at the time his mind was still balanced. Nevertheless, he did not find any appropriate occasion to warn and to reapproach the conspirators. As to my refusal to join the conspiracy, I did not tell neither the empress or anyone else about it. But those conspirators let out the secret, saying Dejazmatch Tafari refused when we said to him, join the conspiracy. But the empress repeatedly asked me in order to find out about this matter with certainty. I was firm in my statement that there was no one who had asked me to join the conspiracy. Therefore, she declared that she was very pleased about my not letting out the secret and told me, I know the truth. Your refusal to let out the secret is because you are a very discreet man. Since Empress Tatu had heard it being reported that it was in the ministerial council chamber that this matter of conspiracy had been started, she foiled the plot for the time being by causing the ministerial council chamber to be closed. Furthermore, in the previous year, 3 Germans had come on government appointments to an advisorship and posts in medicine and education, and were working while frequently meeting the ministers about their respective tasks. Since Empress Tatu entertained some suspicion that perhaps those Germans might have given advice to the ministers to conspire against her, it was reported that while seeking some pretext, she made them give up their work. Since in that year, Dejazmatch Abrena, the governor of Ederata in the Tigre province, had rebelled. Ras Abata, while he was still Wagashum, attacked Dej Abraha at the end of Maskaram 1902, which is October 1909, and defeated him. It was reported that other governors of Tigre province were looking on in silence without coming to the aid of Dej Abraha or Ras Abata. Emperor Melik's illness was of the type called paralysis, which prevented him moving all his limbs and carrying out his work. On the 17th of Tokamet 1902, which equals to your 27th of October 1909, at 9 o'clock at night, which is your 3 a.m., it suddenly became impossible for him to enter, to move, or to speak. And when the officers and the army heard about this, there was great sadness in the precincts of the palace and in the capital. Yet, after a few days, the illness seemed to relax its hold over him, and he appeared to be getting better, but it was not thought that he had many years left till death would overtake him.
Chapter 4. About my appointment to the governorship of Harar and its province, 1910. After this, Dejazmatch Blachar, who was governor of Harar, was summoned to Addis Ababa in the month of Tashash, December 1909 to January 1910. And even before he entered Addis Ababa, it again began to be rumored by the mouth of the people that the emperor was about to give the governorship of Harar to Dejazmatch Tafari. When Dejazmatch Blachar, while still on his way, heard this, he began to make strenuous endeavors immediately on arrival at Addis Ababa to retain the governorship of Harar by means of incestuous as well as money. But I was biding my time, carrying out my other daily duties, and thinking that I could not fail to obtain the governorship whenever it might be God's will to show me favor. Later, one day, unexpectedly, Ras Bidwadad Tasama, Ras Bidwadad Magasha, Atikam, Fatawari about Jiriosi, and Tashafa Tezes Gabriel Selassie Wada Agrage, while assembled together, summoned me and said, "Although you are still a youth in age, but because your entire work in governing Sidamor had shown you to be knowledgeable, the Empress has now given you a Haraj, which used to be your father's governorate." I bowed and said, "With your help, I will take proper care of the government of the province, for I know that a great responsibility rests upon me in being governor of Harar." The proclamation in my favor was issued in the Great Square on the 24th day of Yakatit, 1902, which equals to your 3rd of March, 1910. And when I went to my home, the people's joy could be seen to exceed all bounds, as the diplomatic corps who had resisted consulate at Harar came to my house, informing me of their participation in my joy. They declared, "We trust that you will govern Harar in the same fine manner as your father." Until I could go down to the governorate of Harar, I transmitted orders that Fatawiri, later Dejazmatch Gabriel, who had been my father's loyal follower, should stay there and protect the country as my deputy. While I was preparing for my journey to Harar, it was suddenly reported that Ras Bidwada Tazama once again secretly stirring up a plot against Empress Taitu. Although it was Ras Bidwada Tazama who was the leader of the conspiracy, Dejazmatch Haile Selassie,
Fatiwari, later Dejazmatch Wasan, Dejazmatch Baka, and Dejazmatch Mared were those who acted as principal supporters. It was said that Dejazmatch, later Ras Dames, who was living there after removal from the governorship, was urging things on secretly rather than openly. A few days after my appointment to the governorship of Harar, all the nobles assembled in the house of the Archbishop, Abuna Matewas, made various seditious charges against Empress Pt.3 and proffered advice expressing their thoughts as follows. We do not want you to enter upon the affairs of government, but you should henceforth remain in the palace looking after the sick emperor. But Empress Pt.3 had many petitions, and consequently things remained in abeyance because it caused difficulty to determine the matter. Empress Pt.3 was strong-willed and an expert in the art of ruling. At that time, I was an admirer of the Empress Pt.3's regal qualities, since it was with her help that I had been appointed to the governorship of Harar. The nobles did not dare talk to me about it and revealed the matter. After things had remained in abeyance, without a decision having been reached, for about 15 days, a meeting was called in the house of Fatiwari Abata Jirioshis, and all of us were summoned on the 11th of Magabite, which is the 20th of March 1910, and went there. Ras Badewada Tazama also came, summoned like the other noblemen, in order to let it appear that he had not entered upon the matter. Afterwards, Fatiwari Abatag-Jirioshi, being the spokesman of the meeting, declared, "We are not pleased about all the work which Empress Pt.3 is carrying out, and particularly about the appointments and dismissals. Only Dejazmatch Tasifori appointment to his father's governorship in Harar is fine, and his alone may stand. But the remaining appointments and dismissals are to be cancelled. In future, she is not to interfere with us in the business of government." And the speech finishes thus. We all say with one voice, "Let Dejazmatch Tafarari's appointment be valid, but it is proper to cancel the older appointments and dismissal." On the morrow, 12th of Megabite, 21st of March, being all assembled together, they entered the palace, approached Empress Pt.3 and said, "It is our view that the Empress should reside in the palace and look after the sick emperor on our behalf. But the work of governor she should leave to the Regent, Ras Badewata Tazama." When they finished speaking, Empress Pt.3 turned her face towards Ras Badewata Tazama and said, "Why do you put the blame on someone else, when you know that it is you who has planned and done this whole thing? I have heard everything for certain. What really saddens me is your operating by stealth. As for the government business, when I told you some time ago that I would take care of the ailing emperor and leave affairs of state alone, you sent Ras Magasha Atikam as an intermediary, arguing while you have been carrying on the business of government without initiating us. So what do we know about it? As for your statement that you abandon state affairs, this is tantamount to saying, what do I care if things break down? When you said to me, it is about my work you undertake from now on that you can best show gratitude to Menelik. Did I not say to you in reply that I would help in every way possible if I can usefully do any work? And again, what? Come now, tell me frankly and say, this I had not heard, and that I had not known. After having spoken thus, she blamed him for 3 things. First, for stirring up secretly the conspiracy. Second, for his sending an emissary demanding that she should carry on the work of government. 3, that she had not been doing anything without informing and consulting him. After this, as Ras Badiwa-Tazama and the other noblemen were ashamed about the matter, they bowed and said, "Forgive us." But since Empress Tatu was very distressed about it, she gave no answer whatsoever as regards, and requested for forgiveness except to weep silently. Nevertheless, the business of government, in accordance with the decision taken in the house of Fatuwari Abata Jiriosi, was transferred in full into the hands of Ras Badiwad Tazama and began to be carried out by him. It had appeared to me proper for this reason that I should wait before going down to my governorate of Harar. But when things were settled, I asked Ras Badiwa Tazama permission to depart, but was told to wait. The reason why I was told to wait was that rumors began to circulate outside to the effect that some monks who claimed to have seen a dream vision told him if Dejazmatch Tafari goes down to Harar, it may become very dangerous to the government of Ledj Iyasu. On the 4th day after Ras Badiwa Tazama had become Regent Plenipotentiary, he immediately arrested Fatuwari Tayagulet, claiming that he was an adversary of Ledj Iyasu. And consequently, there was for a time a good deal of anxiety on my part. But since man cannot avert what God has willed, it was Ras Badiwa Tazama's plan to cause Ledj Iyasu and me to enter into the covenant and thus to prevent anything from happening that might be an obstacle in his work. Thus, he took me and my father's senior officers to the house of Archbishop Abuna Matawaz, and all of us entered upon the following of the covenant with oaths and invocations. 1. That I would not seek by trickery or rivalry Ledj Iyasu's throne. 2. That my officers would not give me bad advice to seize Ledj Iyasu's throne. 3. That Ledj Iyasu, looking upon me with eyes of rivalry, would not dispose me from my father's governorate of Harar. 4. That Ras Tazama, by giving bad and deceitful advice to Ledj Iyasu, would not dismiss me from the governorship of Harar and would not bring about my destruction on account of my alleged rivalry. Since I was subsequently permitted to go down to Harar, I took leave of the great men of rank to whom it was proper to say goodbye by going to each of their houses. Although it was a very delicate time for taking leave of Empress Tatu, I felt that my conscience would reproach me if I went without saying goodbye. Hence, I went to the palace, took my leave, and set out on my journey. At that time, the railway from Addis Ababa to Dire Dawa had not yet been built, and the journey was extremely tiring for me. We reached Harar towards the end of Miazaya, early May. While my deputy at Harar had been awaiting the day of our entry into the city, having prepared a big banquet. It so happened, by coincidence, that on the day on which I reached Harar, it was reported that the English King H.M Edward VIII had died on the 28th of Miazaya, 1902, which equals to your 6th of May, 1910. Consequently, we gave orders that the planned reception in our honor be cancelled and that the flag be flown at the half-mast. We then informed the English Council at Harar at our participation in grief that we felt a special grief was because at the time of King Edward's 8th coronation as King of England and Emperor of India, my father, H.H. Rasmakonin, had gone there as a principal envoy of Emperor Menelik and used to tell me at that time of the honor with which he had been received by the English royal house. As my father reached London for the coronation and heard of the postponement of the coronation day of the account of King Edward's sudden illness, he went to Westminster Abbey and gave accordingly to the customs observed in our country, Ethiopia, to the church, as a votive offering a large golden cross and said, "Coming to London and finding the king in great danger, if I were to return to my country with the celebration of the coronation not taking place, I would be considered a harbinger of bad luck. Therefore, my God, let your trust, King Edward, recover for my sake." My father had told me about this, and I also know of the existence there of the cross from a similar encounter. When I came to visit London in 1916, which equals to 1924, King George V, having done me the honour of inviting me, the then Archbishop of Canterbury, the Honourable Reynold Thomas Davison, when showing me Westminster Abbey, pointed out to me this golden cross and said, "It is the one which your father, H.H. Rasmakonin, had given as a votive offering for the illness of King Edward." 7 days later, the entire ceremony of festive welcome was happily completed, and we set out on the task of administering the country. What it means to administer a large province can only be appreciated by men who have carried out the responsibility of governorship. Even when setting down in writing the affairs of administration, the burden of the task can scarcely be felt by those who just read about it. It may thus seem a commonplace matter to them. However, I had a heavy and very wearisome burden, which was different from that of the other provisional governors. The reasons are as follows. 1. In my father's time, the peasants and soldiers had not known another governor, and they lived in concord, recognizing him alone as master and as father. But since my father's death, because of the gubernatorial tenure of Dejazmatch and Dejazmatch, this state of affairs had changed, and it now felt to me to devise a method by which it was possible to govern by reconciling peasants and soldiers and to please them as in my father's time. Since my brother Dejazmatch had died shortly after his appointment to Harar, and Dejazmatch had been appointed governor in succession, 3,000 of my father's army were given to me. These 3,000 had subsequently gone to Waga, nominally as Ledj Iyasu's army. Now therefore, as they were once again returning to me, I had to re-establish quarters for them. 3. There were many of Dejazmatch and Dejazmatch servants who had remained in Harar because they wanted to stay with me, and I now had to give quarters to them as well. 4. As I informed myself of the Kobowaski Accord into which Emperor Menelik had entered with the French government in 1900, in 1907 to 1908, concerning all matters dealing with relations with foreigners, I had to operate the yoke of this treaty with which Ethiopia had been burdened. The great among the noblemen, soldiers, and peasants in each district had assembled and come to participate in my joy at my appointment to governorship of Harar. We told them that in the future we would inform them of everything we were going to do about the administration of the country. and when we dismiss them, we will resolve to set out on the task of administrating the province. At that time, we became convinced that the administrative regulations were at present unwelcome to the army. Nevertheless, these regulations will undoubtedly become familiar in the course of time, and we carried on with our ideas, conscious that it was necessary to do what it is to benefit of good government. While we were seeking to find all the records with which the governors preceding me had been working, thinking that they would assist us in the task, it turned out to be impossible to find them in full. And only a few of the records of my father H.H. Rasmakonen and of my brother Dejazmatch were in fact discovered. It therefore became necessary for us to make inquiries and to ask the elders among those noblemen and peasants who had been long before living in our era. Moreover, the problem of accommodation of the army officers and the men had become very troublesome for us. The officers' quarters being in one district, while the men's were in another, they met only during military expeditions, but did not always know each other, either by sight or in the chain of command. We were convinced that unless the officers and men lived together in one district, uprooting them from their present quarters and got accustomed to each other by sight and command, it would be very damaging to a good discipline for them to meet at the time of military operations only. Consequently, it was necessary for us to know, first of all, the number of troops and the extent of their quarters, in order to enable us to make proper provisions. We therefore gave orders that men should tour the district of Harar province, counting the presence able to pay taxes, and provide this information speedily by going to each district. When the men who had been ordered to count these peasants returned after completing their work within 3 months, they presented us with written records showing that there were 70,000 inhabitants able to pay taxes. After this, we arranged for the governorate of Harar to be divided into 12 large districts, as follows: Chakarata, Kwari, Wabara, Maita, Anya, surroundings of Harar, Gara Mutala, Afran Kwalo, Jashaso, Jigija, Ogaden, Issa, and Georgia. Over these large districts, we appointed several principal chiefs and arranged that in each district, officers and men according to their ranks be properly organized, landowners, soldiers, and officers had their names entered in the register. And it was arranged that officers and men should stay together instead of being separated from each other, so that they would be found together at a time when they were called up for any reason. It was also arranged to have courts of justice set up in each district to be responsible for each administrative divisions. Only as far as administration of the church in concern was the time not granted to us to complete matters according to our plan, and for the time being we left it as of old. After my father H.H. Rasmakonen had died, much of the governmental framework which had been established had been destroyed on account of the frequent change of governors of Harar. I therefore felt sure in my heart that the yoke of government as heavy upon the inhabitants of the provisions governors of Abagaz, the district chiefs, Damina, and the local headman, Garada, did not protect the population with impartiality. Consequently, we began to seek an improvement of the situation. The Abagaz is in effect the provisional regent. The damina stands between the people in the district and the tax collectors, so that the inhabitants pay their taxes on time. It functions as a control. At least the tax collector should harm the people either by taxes or in other ways. Some deminas have charge of perhaps some 20 to 300 peasants. The Garada is a chief who issues orders and acts under the authority of the damina. This system is the one which has remained in force up to now, it having become customary at the time when the Turks, i.e. Egyptians, had seized the era for a short time, for about 10 years. After my father's death, when the administrative framework which he had established was progressively disintegrating, some tax collectors were receiving up to $12 in cash. When it was difficult for the peasants to produce the honey tax payable on his land, we therefore commanded the governors and tax collectors not to arm the peasants by their rule, for they had begun to do similar things which were harmful to the inhabitants. But unless the people heard of this command and informed of the proclamation, we were convinced that they were not able to dispute imposition of this sort of by refusing to pay. And we therefore proclamated the following proclamation. Proclamation. You who are Abigas, look out for thieves and brigands in your country, which you govern as deputy. If I hear it began said that in a certain province people have been robbed, it is Abigas who will pay them. You who have no master and are unemployed, enter the town which I have given to the Abigas and stay there. But do not disturb the peasants by being in the villages. If the roads in your respective governorates fall into disrepair, build the roads in order not to make things difficult for the traders going up and down the country. Hereto, work on Sabbath was forbidden. Now you will in fact be punished when found working on the Sabbath. As for you who are liable to honey tax and possess of honey, I have indicated to your Abigas the proper measure, hence render your honey in that measure. But if you do not have honey, then give in lieu of the honey $4 if you are Garada, $3 as a Shabbata, 2 as a tenant, and 1 as a shepherd. If, however, you possess honey and say, I would rather give cash, then you have to pay double the quantity of honey if you are found selling honey. You being a Garada paying the same amount of tax as a Shabbata, spend $3 like Shabbata for your honey. Garada, Shabbata, tenant, and shepherd, except if it is difficult for you. Your tax is honey, hence hang up your beehives. And you, Malkana, district collector, do not touch the honey before it is ready. In future, as the past, work with your demeanor in all the work that is to be done. Previously, I told you by proclamation as follows. Having wandered from province to province, yet you have not acquired a new country. Hence, do not eat up the Kobe Basa. Now I have heard it being said that you are receiving it from the peasants. Therefore, return to the peasants this money which you have received beyond the terms of this proclamation. And for the future, you, the Abagas, and the Mina, watch lest the Makana, district collector, going beyond what has been assigned to them, take away the peasants' money. If the peasants tell you about the money which has been extorted in excess, and if you persist in not returning it to them, and if then the peasants do not work and come to me to complain, then the loss is yours, and you will have to pay the money, and will then have to get it back from the persons whom you have taken it from, the peasants. And as for you, peasants,
do not come to me before you have spoken to Abagaz and the demeanor for the 3 annual festivals, i.e. for Maskal, Christmas and Easter. Receive $2 each in lieu of castrated goats, but beyond this you will not receive anything. Harar, the 13th of Amil 1905, which is your 21st of July 1913. When the proclamation had been issued, although the Abagaz and the district collectors were for a time not at the pleasant, after a few months they got used to the new administrative rules and discovered their usefulness. As for the peasants, since the yoke of the government and taxes were lightened for them, they all set out to do the work with calm hearts. Chapter 5. From the time of my marriage up to appointment as Crown Prince and Regent Plenipotentiary, 1911 to 1916. When I had been governor of Harar and its entire province for about a year, stabilizing without mishap the life of peasants and soldiers, of government and all else necessary for administration, it was decided by my wish and by that of my relations that I should marry. I was in my 20th year at the time. Wazaro Menen, now Empress, the granddaughter of Negus Makel. We were married by church ceremony on the 23rd of Amel 1903, which is your 31st of July 1911. Her character is such that, apart from goodness, there is no evil or malice in her. Ever since we were married, we lived together by virtue of her being fertile, in one family sharing joy as well as sadness. In saying that we live together sharing joy as well as sadness, I cannot admit writing about the first great sadness as follows. We were informed at Harar of the death in 1907, which is 1914 to 15, of Ras Ayala Mariam, Wazaro Menen's younger brother. When their mother, Wazaro Shehin, returned from Wallo to Addis Ababa, it was decided that because of her brother's death, Wazaro Menen should go up to Addis Ababa for the joint mourning. And consequently, she set out from Harar on Monday the 30th of Gembot, which is 7th of June 1915. Having accompanied her as far as Aramaya, we camped by the shore of Lake Haramaya as we, i.e. Dejazmatch, wished to return to Harar. In the past, there was a boat in which the foreigners living in Harar and Deradawa used sometimes to enter the lake of Haramaya for recreation. We therefore left the tent at 9 o'clock, which is 3 p.m., and went to the lake. There were 10 people who boarded the boat with us to relax on the lake. After we had embarked, we passed towards the center and eventually crossed to the other side. Having stayed a little while on the opposite side shore, we entered the boat once again to return to our camp. But the boat was rather old, and as we reached the middle of the lake, it was holed and water began to enter. As the people in the boat scooped out the water with their hats, it did not diminish when they poured it out. Once we had become convinced of the fact that the boat was leaking, that it was impossible to cross with us inside it, and that we were all of us sinking with the boat, we began to swim with great difficulty. But as the lake was wide and it was impossible to cross it by swimming, the following 7 men became exhausted and they drowned. Abatasafa, Dejazmatch, Gabriel Walad, Ato Yama Shehum, Kidayam Mariam Malayaswala, Asma, Abba, Samuel, and Paulos,
both. But I and Dejazmatch Haile Selassie were going under and coming up again. Dejazmatch, Abraya's servant, helped me. As the officers and men who were watching this standing by shore of the lake became convinced of the shipwreck, all those able to swim threw themselves into the lake. And as they reached us, we emerged having only just escaped from death. As we got out, our souls had barely been prevented from getting separated from our bodies, but we were unable to recognize anyone or to speak. It so happened that by chance, Dr. Severus, a Greek who had earlier been a physician, was there at that time, and he treated me with medicines as far as possible, and little by little, I was able to recognize people's outline. On the morrow, they carried me on a stretcher to Amaresa, and from Amaresa took me down to Harar. And on the 12th day, being quite well again, I went up to the church of St. Michael's and gave thanks to God. Wayaraso Menen, being shocked on the account of my accident, abandoned her journey to Addis Ababa and returned to Harar. Chapter 6. The reason why the rancour between Ledj Iyasu and myself began. After my appointment to governorship to Harar and my marriage to Wayaraso Menen, I lived happily for about a year. But thereafter, since in this world joy and sadness always alternate, my joy began progressively to change into sadness. The reason for this is as follows. After the death of Ras Betuwada Tazama, who had been Ledj Iyasu's guardian and regent of the empire, no other guardian had been appointed for Ledj Iyasu. Those worthless men, whom he had made advisors, associated with me some foreign traders, and said, "We are importing from abroad commodities like this. We are sending abroad goods like that. Hence, excuse us custom duties." Very few only were those who sought the truth and advised him as follows. Quite apart from obtaining permits by fraud, if they do this, your government will be harmed. If they do that, your government will profit. If they do this rotten thing, the people will be hostile. Furthermore, when he claimed by virtue of his Wallo descent to be descendant from the Prophet Muhammad, counting back from 40 generations, and when he worked for a meeting and reapproach in faith with the Muslims, he would not accept it if anyone tried to advise, "Lay off, for it is this sort of thing that will bring damage upon your government and upon yourself." He began to arrange for the palace arms and all the other excellent equipment to go to Nagos Makel. While in doing all this, he was aware of everybody's hostility, and instead of watching things by being in one place, it did a great deal of roaming about, joyful, invading tranquil province and killing people, sometime going to Gemira, another to Wallo, yet another to Adel country, and sometimes to Harar. The blood of many was flowing. When he returned from his trips, the nobles and ministers tendering advice and getting angry or despaired when they realized their inability to restore his mind to sanity. There were, however, some who advised him as follows. If the honor of the great nobles of Menelek's time were reduced and their rank diminished, then it would be convinced for you to raise to the office the humble. It will assured result from this that these minor figures will respectively love you alone, and with their support you will be able to act as you wish and to destroy your enemies. As this appeared to him to be true, he began to strive to bring this about. He himself came upon me at Harar in 1907, which is your 1914 to 15, summoned my army's officers and the great among the peasants, and asked at a secret meeting, "Tell me if there is a wrong that Dejazmatch has done you." He then granted audiences, while giving advice to my detriment, stayed a few days and then returned. I heard this from men who had actually been questioned. Afterwards, in Gebont, which is your May 1916, he summoned me to Addis Ababa, and when we had remained together for about 2 months, he set out from Addis Ababa by night on the 21st of April, which is your 29th of July, without informing me, boarded the train at Akaki, and next morning I heard about his descendants to Harar. When I knew for certain that he had gone down to Harar, and although he went there without informing me, I thought it should not appear that I was hostile to his journey there, because he had not given me prior information. For the title to Harar governorship was mine, and I therefore wrote him a letter as follows: "If you are staying at Harar, let me come there. If you are returning to Addis Ababa, I shall return together with you." When I had sent him that letter by the hand of my servant Sakalawa Kalala, he wrote back to me on the 28th of April 1908, which is the 5th of August 1916 to you, as follows: "I had told Batiwa Alaya Girosi that he should inform you of the reason why I came to Harar. If you were to come to Harar now and then to return with me to Addis Ababa, the railway deflect would be very great for you, because your army is so numerous, hence stay there. If I were to stay here for a long time, I would write to you again." When he entered Harar city, evil men who came between us and tendered advice that he should dismiss Dejazmatch from the governorship of Harar and appoint himself, began to press him to put the practice and counsel they had earlier preferred, for now they had Ledj Iyasu to themselves. Therefore, on the 7th of Nahashar 1908, which is your 14th of August 1916, he summoned my deputy Fatwari Gabriel and gave orders that all the campaign palaces in the hands of Dejazmatch's servants be seized, apart from those occupied by the government troops. He then transmitted the following orders by telegram to H.I.M Haile Selassie: "I have assumed, with immediate effect, the governorship of Harar. I have given the governorship of Kaffa to Dejazmatch. Let him be told." He informed me that I was to go to Kaffa at once, as these were the Ledj Iyasu's orders. Subsequently, he, Ledj Iyasu, sent me a letter direct, written on the 10th of Nashar 1908, which is your 17th of August 1916, stating, "I have appointed Harar my own personal governorate. I have placed under your governorship Kaffa Maji, and under your authority Garurafada." When the people at Addis Ababa, great and small, heard this, they declared openly the fact that he, Ledj Iyasu, is taking away the governorship of Harar from Dejazmatch. It's not so much of the governorate, but because he has been converted to the Islamic faith, and for the sake of further reapproachment to the Muslims. At the time of the Great World War, when some foreigners presented to him, Ledj Iyasu, their view, even though you cannot help the English and the French and the Italians, who are Ethiopia's neighbors at the frontiers with armed forces, it would be good if you would at least assist with provisions, i.e. with food. Yet it did not listen. Instead, he had begun an exchange of secret correspondence with the people surrounding Ethiopia, the Adalites and the Somalians, with a view to resisting the Allies. But As the representatives of the three governments resided at Addis Ababa and discovered this exchange of secret letters, they made an official approach, and it was reported presented the correspondence to Badawadi Haile Selassie. When the leaders of Ethiopia found out about this whole affair, they became convinced of the need to dispose Ledj Iyasu. But as it appeared to them likely that their secret would be betrayed if they were assembled together for consultation, they chose servants as trusted messengers and began to correspond through them as go-in-betweens. But some met by night at a hidden place, and after talking to each other face to face, separated again. Others again were asking, "Inform us first about the successor once Ledj Iyasu is disposed." But the party which approved of Ledj Iyasu's deposition began to grow steadily, since they gladly accepted the opinion when they were told, "We shall put Emperor Melech's daughter Queen Zawditu on the throne and shall appoint H.I.M Haile son Dejazmatch as crown prince and regent." When they asked me to enter upon these consultations, I replied, "When I first departed for my father's governorate of Harar to take up my appointment, Ras Badiwa Tazama took us both, Ledj Iyasu and myself, to the house of the Archbishop Abuna Matawaz, and caused us to enter upon a covenant by oaths and invocations that Ledj Iyasu should not dispose me of my governorship of Harar, and that I should not seek his throne by foul means. But now Ledj Iyasu has violated the solemn covenant of oaths and invocation, has dismissed me from my governorship of Harar, and for my part this is sufficient evidence. Furthermore, I said this to them: Since you have now convinced me of Ledj Iyasu's conversion to Islam, there is nothing at which I differ from you." And they gave me adequate information by reading out everything they had written, so that it be proof to people for the future. Chapter 7. From the disposition of Ledj Iyasu on the 17th of Maskaram, 1909, which is your 27th of September 1916, to the assumption of the crown by Queen Zawditu on the 4th of Yakatit, 1909, which is your 11th of February 1917. While Ledj Iyasu went to and from between the towns of Deredawa, Harar and Tigre, and while he assembled Adalites and Somalis, giving them medals and arms, he stayed there declaring, "I am on your side, in respect of religion." It was then heard that Muslims were mocking, "He is neither Christian or Muslim." On the 17th day of Maskaram 1909, which is your 27th of September 1916. On the day of the great festive of Maskar, it was arranged that the nobles with the army and the Archbishop Abuna Matawaz and Etejwada Jiriosi with the priest should assemble at a prepared place within the precinct of the palace. And when they had all arrived, taking their seat accordingly to their rank, and falling in the incitement against Ledj Iyasu, which had been secretly prepared, was read out. The Christian faith, which our fathers had hitherto carefully retained by fighting for their faith with Muslims and by shedding their blood, Ledj Iyasu exchanged for the Muslims' religion and aroused commotion in our midst. In order to exterminate us by mutual fighting, he has converted to Islam, and therefore we shall henceforth not submit to him. We shall not place a Muslim king on the throne of a Christian king. We have ample proof of his conversion to Islam.
1. He married 4 wives, claiming the Quran permits it to me. Of these wives, one of the daughter of Abba Jigafar of the Jama nobility, the second is the daughter of Hajj Abdullahi of the Harar nobility, the third is the daughter of Abu Kaba of Adil nobility. The father of the fourth, Dejazmatch, became a Christian and baptized his daughter while she lived under her baptism name as Kala Maryam. It was Dejazmatch's daughter that he, Ledj Iyasu, later on, after his conversion to Islam, gave the Muslim woman name of Mu'mina. Second, he built a mosque in Jigajiga with government funds and gave it to the Muslims. Third, at the time he sent Marazabey, the foreign Turkish consul resident at Addis Ababa, as he was celebrating the Ramadan fest. Our Ethiopian flag, on which there was written the Lion of the tribe of Judah, has prevailed, and adored with the sign of the cross, on which he had caused to be written following words in Arabic: There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Fourth, he wore Somalian Muslim clothes and Muslim turban, held the Islamic rosary, and was seen to prostrate himself in the mosque. Fifth, he was seen praying and reading the Quran, having had it transcribed in Arabic characters. Sixth, on the headgear of his special guards, he had embroidered the legend, There is no God but Allah. Seventh, H.I.M Haile had built a church at Harar and had made the area joining the church into a dwelling for the clerics, giving the Muslims a place in exchange. Then 32 years later, he, Ledj Iyasu, expelled the cleric and restored it to the Muslims. 8. When a girl was born to him, he saw it that she would grow up learning the Muslim religion, and he gave her the Muslim Madam Anafi, and said, Bring her up on my behalf. 9. He despised the descent of Menelik II, which comes direct from Menelik I, and claimed to be descendants from the Prophet Muhammad. Assembling the great Muslim sheikhs, he spent the day convincing them of these genealogical calculations. 10. The day on which our great king, Emperor Menelik, who had bequeathed him the throne, died, instead of mourning and of arranging limitations, he went out horse riding to Jarmida and spent the day playing combat games. He forbade Menelik's body to be buried, and dignity thus he has remained up till now. We possess a great deal of further similar proof against Ledj Iyasu. Therefore, having disposed them, Ledj Iyasu, we have placed on the throne Wayazaro Zawditu, Emperor Menelik's daughter. We have appointed Dejazmatch the son of H.H. Ras Makonnen, Crown Prince, with the rank of Ras and Regent of the Empire. When the reading of this proclamation was concluded, all those assembled said with one voice, We accept gladly, hence let it be carried out with success. The Archbishop, Abuna Matawaz, and the engaged Wada Jiriosi spoke the following final words: Ledj Iyasu, as the reputed Christian religion, and because he has been converted to the Islamic faith, we have excommunicated him. You will be excommunicated in henceforth. You follow Ledj Iyasu and submit to him, instead of living strong in the Orthodox faith, watchful of the freedom of your government. Afterwards, the proclamation was issued by which the throne and the crown went to Queen Zawditu, while the success to the throne and the regency Plenipotentiary went to me. The text of the proclamation was then transmitted by telephone to the princess and the nobles and all the provisional governors in the whole of Ethiopia.
As it was about 40 years since Dejazmatch had been converted from Islam to Christianity, he had been mentioning to some of the nobles his sadness at his son's conversion to Islam. Consequently, the text of the proclamation was transmitted to him in the thought that he was bound to be allied with us now as regards his son's deposition. When Ledj Iyasu, staying at Harar, heard about his own disposition, the enthronement of Queen Zawditu and my appointment as Crown Prince and Regent Plenipotentiary, he collected Somalis and Adalids and arranged for the disturbance to be created in the city. As Christians and Muslims were now fighting on the separate sides, some 500 men from both sides died. As Dejazmatch, Blachar and Dejazmatch, now Ras and Mru, were at the time in an era they were seized, but Ledj Iyasu released Dejazmatch Blachar under the oath that he would not get separated from him. Dejazmatch and Mru, however, he kept under detention. All my officers and servants, with few exceptions, who were at Harar, deserted Ledj Iyasu, departed for the district called Kwasa, and began to wait in proper battle information. Dejazmatch and Mru escaped from the place at which he had been detained and went out there. This is what happened to Ledj Iyasu subsequently. Having collected a regular body of troops, he appointed Dejazmatch Gusar Aloy as army commander. Since it was reported that Ledj Iyasu has dispatched him a wash, we made Dejazmatch Ayawale Baru army commander and sent Detach Ayala Mariam Lamar, Detach Adamasu Baru, Legit Ababa Damawata, Legit Dasata Damta, Fatuwari Makura Gamame, and added other regular troops. They encountered each other at a railway station called Meso. And on the 25th of Maskaram, which is your 6th of October, they defeated Dejazmatch Gusar Aloy. To himself, however, escaped by train and entered Dera Dawa. When Ledj Iyasu saw that the Christians at Harar and its entire province, as well as the Muslims, were deserting him, he went down to Dera Dawa and seized about all he could of the money in the treasury. What he could not take, he sent to Djibouti by the hands of M. Yadibi, and then travelled by the way of Adal Desert to reach his father's governorate of Wallo. But a telephone message had been transmitted to Dejazmatch to the effect, "As your son has gone over to Islam, we have disposed him. I've enthroned Queen Zawditu and have appointed H.I.M Haile Crown Prince and Regent Parliamentary." When Dejazmatch realized this, he said, "I had been striving to make my son firm in the Christian faith, even to the point of angrily cancelling him. But nevertheless, I cannot silently look on while they take away from him the throne which his grandfather, Emperor Menelik, had given him." It was reported then that Dejazmatch had mobilized his army by proclamation and was marching towards Shohar. Therefore, the prince, nobles, and ministers jointly sent him the following message in writing. May it reach Dejazmatch, whose authority is written upon his shoulders, King of Zion. You, the king, know that all the work which your son Ledj Iyasu has accomplished from the time he became crown prince up to the present was childish behavior. When he meant to train him with reproachful counsel, we did not find the occasion because, to our chagrin, he never stayed long enough in one place. When at times we managed to find him and tendered advice, he would not accept our view. When we watched him patiently, lest his personality should feel offended, thinking that perhaps one day soon he would become aware of his governor's need, and of his own rank and honor, and perhaps abandon his youthful pursuits. Yet he had still not had enough of this perilio and began striving to establish Islam in our country, Ethiopia, which had lived steadfast in her Christianity for some 16,000 years. Since Abara and Ashbana and Salama, the reveler of the light. When in the previous year it came to Wallo, you, O king, know yourself all the things he did, together with the Muslims during the rainy season. Again, we have heard of your angry counsel to Ledj Iyasu, when you recognized that his heart had been alienated from the Christian faith, and said to him, I beg you, my son, abandon this plan of yours. Yet even you, O king, did not prevail. And now we are sending you, together with this letter, photographs of him which prove all things he has been doing jointly with the Muslim when he went down to Harar secretly without informing us. We had suffered all this patiently, but when all of us together, including Archbishop and the Exarch, sent him a letter requesting him to come to Addis Ababa, at any rate for the New Year celebration, he persisted in not coming. Our anxieties acting in this manner arises from the thought that lest the Christian faith be extinguished, and for this reason the blood of Christians be shed in vain, and our country pass into the hands of foreigners. May the king thus be very mindful of this matter. It is known that the people would not have risen up unless they had been given certainty of this. Moreover, we would remind you of the extinction of your name as well, for it is bound to remain recorded in history for future generations. Because of Ledj Iyasu, Dejazmatch's son, the Christian religion was eclipsed in Ethiopia and the Islamic faith expanded. In writing all this to the king, it is not that we have acted thus with intention that Ledj Iyasu be harmed, or in particularly that the king be antagonized, but it is with the thought that we should act jointly for what is on behalf to the religion and to our government. Your plans do not derive from ours. We know that you love Emperor Menelik, and all of us are much concerned for the Christian faith. 24th of Maskaram, 1909, which is your 5th of October 1916. After this letter had reached Dejazmatch, he refused to return in any circumstances, and as our envoys informed us by telephone of his marching forward, we placed the army that was stationed at Addis Ababa at the time under the command of Ras Lu Sagad and sent him in advance. When he reached a Shohan district called Torah Mosque, he suddenly encountered Dejazmatch's advanced troops. And on Tuesday the 7th of Tequemet, which is your 17th of October 1916, we heard by telephone of the death of in battle Ras Lu Sagad, Dejat Maskaram Gazu, Lekil Maskawaz, Abba Atafan Sagad, Fitawari Sade Gobana, Asalafi Abba, Dejazmatch Delanishu, Asalafi Desanis, Anton Shadawaye, and other army commanders. Already, earlier in our war minister, Fatuwari Abba Genegosi had left Addis Ababa on the 3rd of Tequemet, 13th of October, and when he reached Koromash, after a long march, we arranged that he should stay there disturbing to each soldier's arms for the war material at Koromash. And we ourselves sent out on the 9th of Tequemet, which is your 19th of October. so that the armed forces from each district should arrive by as rapid a march as possible, we informed the army by the following proclamation, the text of the proclamation. Listen, people of my country, Ethiopia. Since Ledj Iyasu, digressing from Emperor Menelek's wishes, had openly shown his adherence to Islam, prostrating himself in mosques, together with Muslims, and tracing back his Islamic genealogy, while setting aside Menelek's curse against him designed to prevent him committing evil deeds. He was unable to carry on the administration, and we therefore had to dispose him and place Queen Zawditu on her father's throne. While we were thinking that Dejazmatch was aware of his son's conversion to Islam, and that together with us we would be shedding his blood for Christian faith, he came marching from Wallo to fight us, insisting that we should at once submit to the Muslim king. Therefore, those of you who are men, follow me. After we'd issued this proclamation, we marched forward. But since bloodshed among the Ethiopians themselves is extremely saddening, I arranged that the monks and prior from the ministries of Debra, Lebanos, and Sokila, and from all the various churches, would be selected and come with the crosses to request Dejazmatch to go back to Wallo without making war. But word reached us by telephone that Dejazmatch, far from going back, had in fact seized and arrested the monks who had been sent to bring about peace. We thus became convinced that his decision to engage in battle was now plain and generally known. On the 15th of Trekhamet, which is your 25th of October, we set out to Quoramash and marched on. On the 16th of Trekhamet, which is your 26th of October, our camp and that of Dejazmatch spent the night opposite each other at a plain of the Tara district called Segali. On Friday the 17th, Trekhamet, which is your 27th of October, starting at 7 o'clock at night, which is 1 a.m., he, Dejazmatch, stationed his army officers on the right and left flanks and positioned himself in the center. And when the morning dawned, he began opening fire and launched a surprise attack against our gunners, who had been spending the night on guard duty. Therefore, we placed our minister, Fatiwari Abatagirigosi, at the front, Ras Kassa and Dejazmatch's rear, and the remaining Rases and Dejazmatches on the right and left flanks. When we had joined the entire army at the rear, we engaged the enemy in battle. When we had fought from early morning for about 5 hours, when the Sha'an army, leaping like leopards seeing a goat, like a lion seeing a cow, entered in battle formation, swords drawn, and fighting hand to hand, Dejazmatch was defeated and captured. Of his army, many died, and many were captured, while those who remained fled and returned to Wallo. When Ledj Iyasu, having to travel by the way of Adal country and marching fast to reach the battle, arrived at Akonaba, he retraced his steps and got to Wallo region by Adla the Tor. Although it was generally known that Dejazmatch had been captured, this was a formality only. In fact, we arranged everything befitting his dignity so that no humiliation whatsoever should affect him. As for the other prisoners, since we have no other quarrel with Wallo and mindful of the fact that we are all natives of one Ethiopia, we allow them by proclamation to go back to the country of Wallo after their release. As we announced the story of the victory to Addis Ababa by telephone, all the people of the capital, from Queen Zawditu downwards, were overjoyed. When we got back to Addis Ababa on Thursday the 24th to Comet, which is your 2nd of November, H.M. Queen Zawditu stated in a vast tent at Janmeda, and the people of the capital, being assembled in full, received us with great parade, with ululating and with joy. Chapter 8. From the coronation of Queen Zawditu up to Ledj Iyasu's defeat at Wallo and subsequent escape. Since it had been resolved in the council that Queen Zawditu's coronation should take place on the 4th of Yakatit, which is 1909, your 11th of February 1917, we began passing on instructions to all chiefs that everything necessary for the celebration of the coronation be prepared. They were invited to come to Addis Ababa for the coronation. The governor of Bakamade and Semin, Ras Walda Ginerosi, the governor of Saleh, Borona and Dara Ras Kasa, the governor of Jojam, Ras Alu and the governor of Tigre, Ras Semu and the other governors of the large province. The political atmosphere at that time was grave for invitations of this kind. Respectfully, invitations to come to the coronations were sent to governors of foreign countries. Conterminous with Ethiopia, i.e., the governors of British Sudan and the British Somaliland, as well as the governors of the French Somaliland. When all those invited had arrived, on Sunday the 4th of Yakatit, which is your 11th of February 1917, in the great cathedral, the church of St. George, Queen Zawditu was anointed with the oil of kingship at the hands of the Archbishop Abuna Matawas, and wore the imperial crown. After this, according to the law of ordinances of kingship, it was once more proclaimed in front of those assembled within the precincts of the church that Queen Zawditu, sitting on her father's throne, was assuming her reign, and I was becoming crown prince and regent parliamentary. 8 days later, on 11th Yakatit, which is your 18th of February, Ras Walda Ginerosi was crowned by Queen Zawditu and proclaimed the Goose of Gondar. For the sake of his kingship, authority over the Tigre province was added for his enhancement. In making once again proper balances and adjustments for the provisional appointments and demolitions, we gave to Ras Wallo his and thus governorate of Yajud, to his son Ras Gostar Wallo, the Saint Regent, and to Ras Abata, the 7 tribes of Wallo, Dejazmatch's former governorate. When Ledj Iyasu heard of the appointments and dismissal that had been made, he hurried down from Magdala and marched to Yajud. As the news reached us that he had clashed with Ras Wallo's younger son, Dejazmatch, defeating and capturing him, it became clear to us that henceforth there could be no peace or security unless Ledj Iyasu was seized. We therefore arranged for a large army under the command of our war minister, Fatiwari Abata Jigarosi, to proceed to Wallo, to search strenuously for Ledj Iyasu and to capture him. When Fatiwari Abata Jigarosi reached Wallo, he heard that Ledj Iyasu was collecting an army while roaming the country here and there. He then took the city of the sea and began waiting for Ledj Iyasu there. The principal commanders with Fatawari Aba Gejawasi was Ras Abata and Ras Kasa, and with them were Dejazmatch Kabada, Tasama and Dejazmatch Ayala, Miriam Lama, as well as Dejazmatch Makuramya Gamame, and other military commanders. After Ledj Iyasu had collected a sizable army, he appointed his father's army commanders, i.e. Ras Yama, as commander-in-chief and Fatawari Sarah Bazu as deputy commander. On 21st of Nashar 1909, which is your 27th of August 1917, early in the morning he launched an attack. Joint battle and fierce fighting took place. Fatawari Abata Gigorosi, without leaving his ward emplaced, resisted vigorously and emerged victorious, while Ras Yama was captured, but Fatawari Sarah Bazu died in that battle. When Ledj Iyasu heard of the capture of Ras Yama and of his death of Sarah Bazu, he escaped, galloping off on his horse quite alone, and made for the countryside. The news of the victory was transmitted by wire the same day, and there was great rejoicing in Addis Ababa. But since in this world joy and sadness are mixed, Ras Abata, who had been ill for some time, rose on the day of the battle, refusing to stay in bed in his tent, and spent the day fighting. As a consequence, his illness became worse, and on the 6th of Twekamet 1910, which equals to your 16th of October 1917, he died. When the death announcement reached us, there was great mourning. We arranged for his body to be taken to Debra Labanos, went down there ourselves, and had him buried with high honors. As a memorial, we caused his sword to be buried with his body. Chapter 9, about the dismissal of ministers and the outbreak of an influenza epidemic. About 10 years had elapsed since ministers were first appointed. In any event, since the people as a whole were very incensed about the ministers' negligence to carry on equitable the business of government, and about the gradual deterioration of every aspect of the work, they rose up in the league and with each other indicated that the ministers should be charged for the good of the people. But as it had not been heritable, being customary for the authority of the people to intervene in the appointment and dismissals of ministers, we argued on their behalf to the best of our ability by refusing to dismiss them. In thinking to calm matters, we arranged for the ministers to depart for the time being, until new ministers could be selected and appointed. The entire work had to be carried out on our responsibility alone, and this caused great fatigue to us. After this, from the 1st of Adar on the 30th, which is your 10th of November to the 9th of December, there broke out at Addis Ababa and in all other province in Ethiopia an influenza epidemic, and in the city of Addis Ababa alone more than 10,000 people died. But I, after I had fallen gravely ill, was spared from death by God's goodness. The great war that had raged in Europe came to an end in this year, and the Germans and the Turks were defeated by France, England, Italy, and by the other allied governments. Ledj Iyasu had not at the time permitted us to help even by supplying provisions to our neighbours. And although we had stood apart, the victors were our neighbours, and we therefore decided to send envoys to them to congratulate them, adding some money for the aid of the wounded. The following was selected for this task. To the French government, Dejazmatch Wallo Gabriel Bashar as principal, and included in this delegation were Dejazmatch Shabashi Bayan, Negastra Zadawag, to England and the United States, Dejazmatch Nadawa as principal, and included in his delegation were Ato Heriu, Wada Selassie, Kanebatu Gabiru. To the Italian government, Dejazmatch Gadawacha Abba as principal, and included in his delegations were Fatuari Magasha Weheb and Azaji Dagafa. They departed from Addis Ababa in April to May 1919 and returned when they had concluded the business for which they had been sent. Chapter 10. About Ledj Iyasu's arrest in Tigre. Ledj Iyasu, having fought at the sea with our war ministers, Fatuari Abajigirosi, and having been defeated, had escaped into the Asu desert. When he had stayed there for about 2 years, wandering to and from, he emerged from the desert and was rumored to have gone to a place called Kwabasha. The governor of Tigre, Ras Seyum, had for a time tried to make peace with him, Ledj Iyasu, but as it was extremely difficult to say, give up the notion of kingship and crown and let someone else take them, he abandoned reconciliation and made him leave his governorate. Thereupon, he went away from Ras Seyum's domain and entered that of Ras Gusa Araya. When we had heard of this, we transmitted orders to Ras Gusa that he should search for him and capture him. Ras Gusa indicated as followings: I wish to undertake the search, but as Ledj Iyasu had secret conversation with Ras Seyum, I am afraid the latter might come and snatch him away. Therefore, let some men come to me as his guards. We therefore sent to Tigre for the arrest of Ledj Iyasu. Ledj later Ras Dasta Damwata as internal personnel guard, and Dejazmatch Getawacha and Dejazmatch Haile Selassie. Fatuari Wake, Dejazmatch Wasin Tafara, and Dejazmatch Walad Selassie, so that they should act together with Ras Gusa as external guards. We were at their sea, having travelled there, departing from Addis Ababa on Thursday after Easter, 27 of Miyasa, 1930, which is your 5th of May, 1921, in order to listen on all sides. The governor of Gojajam, Ras Elu, was summoned, and we met as he entered the sea in battle order. When Ras Gusa informed us of the arrest of Ledj Iyasu, after a successful search, we ordered him to come to the sea at once with the capture, and he brought him along and handed him over. Ras Seyum was also summoned, and we took away from him the governorship of Adawa as a punishment for sending off Ledj Iyasu without arresting him, and gave the governorship to Dejazmatch Gabriel Selassie. To Ras Gusa, we gave an additional governorship, on top of his previous one, for capturing and bringing in Ledj Iyasu. We made a number of adjustments in promotions and demotions, and gave leave to Ras Elu to return to Gojam. We went back to Addis Ababa and got there on the 12th of Amel, which is your 19th of July 1921. We dispatched Ledj Iyasu to Salali to Fechi and arranged that he should reside there, guard by our faithful Ras Kasa. As Ledj Iyasu had remained at liberty for about 4 years since his disposition in 1909, which is 1916, some idlers had not ceased causing trouble, but following Ledj Iyasu's arrest, there had been great benefit to the country in the progressive spread of peace and security.